Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Oh, yep. Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com. Across the state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends. Whew. Man, you ready for some Truth Tuesdays? That's right. A little Truth Tuesday today. Brad Keithley's weekly top 3. Or as we like, the Truth Tuesday top 3. That's actually TTTT. If you spell it, it's kind of sexy when you think about it that way. Words are awesome, huh? That's right. That's right. So today we're going to be diving into it with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets here in just a few moments. And we're going to be getting down into the weeds with him a little bit on some of the issues that face us around the state. And we're going to be revisiting a couple things, including the Alaskan Anomaly, the Permanent Fund Board, and more. That's going to be here in just a second. In hour 2 of the program today, it's going to be me and you in our, in the first part of the hour, where I may recap. Brad always kind of tickles something in my brain that I want to spout off about. So we'll probably talk about a little bit of that. And then in the, in the end of the hour, we'll be joined by Chris Story, who will give us the weekly, uplift where we need a little, because sometimes we get a little dauber down from the truth, but it's okay. Chris is here to lift us up and he is the wind beneath my wings. It will be fantastic. He's my Bette Midler. Oh man, it's an image that nobody needed, but you get the point. That's coming up an hour or two. Meanwhile, Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets joins us now. If I can make Brad laugh in the morning, I feel like I've accomplished the mission. That's it right there. Hello, Brad. How are you?
I'm doing great. You're Bette Midler?
Yeah. You're like the knuckle dragging thug who beats me down, and then he's the guy who picks me up. He's the wind beneath my wings, something like that. You're the Ike Turner, that gives me the fist, and then.
Well, now, okay, all right, enough of that. We're going downhill fast.
I was looking for the music analogy there, so it's like, no, it's all good. Truth Tuesdays is what we got here going on, and we're ready to go. So, Brad, not to beat a dead horse, but some of these things keep coming back to us again and again and again. We'll start off here in hour one with kind of the Orwellian take on language from AKFiscal, and give us this. The Orwellianization is what you said in your email, and I was like, "Wow, that's a word. I love it. Orwellianization. What do you mean? Hit me with this. What are we talking about here?"
Well, it's a word that's easier to type than it is to pronounce.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
As I was typing it out, it made sense. So, the Alaska fiscal situation has been characterized in a number of situations by changes in language. It's if you can't change the law, change the language. And there's been two big changes that have occurred that demonstrate that. We're going through the second right now. The first was in 2017, when they realized they weren't going to be, and by they, I mean Natasha and Bert and others, realized they weren't going to be able to change the statute around the PFD. What they did was a sleight of hand. They previously had characterized the PFD as designated general funds, DGF. And that was the way in which it had shown up in the fiscal summaries for decades. But in 2017, realizing they weren't going to be able to change the statute that set aside the PFD, what they did was change the language, and they recharacterized the PFD from designated general funds, which meant it was those funds were designated for a specific purpose, set aside for that purpose. The legislature could go grab them. They can go grab any designated general funds, but they were on the books as set aside for a specific purpose. They recharacterized those as unrestricted general funds, UGF. And all of a sudden it was, we can use those anytime we want for anything we want. They're unrestricted. Those PFD revenues are unrestricted general funds. And we'll just, start applying them across the board. Didn't change the statute, but changed the language around the statute. And what's really interesting is the language that's in the fiscal summaries about defining what designated general funds are is still there. Restricted revenue equals spending for each category. Designated, this is from the most recent legislative finance fiscal summary. Designated general funds include, one, program receipts that are restricted to the program that generates the receipts. And the best example of that is university tuition paid for by university students. It's actually, state money. It's paid to the state, but the state restricts it over to the use by the universities. And two, revenue, this is designated general funds, revenue that is statutorily designated for a specific purpose. That's the definition of designated general funds. And PFDs, they haven't changed the statute. PFDs still fit that category, still fit that definition of designated general funds, revenue that is statutorily designated for a specific purpose. But they changed because they couldn't change the statute, because they couldn't undesignate those funds. They couldn't get enough votes to undesignate those funds. They just started calling them something else. They just changed the language, unrestricted general funds. And that is the genesis for a lot of the issues that we've had since, because they're unrestricted general funds. We can apply them anything, and we apply them anywhere, and we're just going to do that and ignore the statutory designation, or as Tim Bradner sometimes says, just declare that obsolete and just ignore it because it's still in the books like any other statute that we're enforcing today, but it's obsolete because there's no longer no longer fits the definition or something like that. We're going through the second phase of that, the second step of that right now. So we've got all these funds. We've moved them from designated funds. We've redefined them as no longer meeting designated general funds for some reason, and we call them unrestricted general funds. And so now we can spend them on anything. Now what they're doing is they're beginning to realize that, we've got money left over at the end of appropriations. People are stopping short of appropriating all of the revenue they possibly could. They're holding back on revenue, but now they've got in the budget, they've got some leftover money that statutorily, since it's coming from the PFD, statutorily should be paid to the PFD. It's not appropriated for anything else. Statutorily designated for the PFD should be paid to the PFD. Even after all the cuts, there's some left over. So now they've got some left over, and in order to avoid addressing the fact that it should be under the statutes and could be under the budget appropriated to the PFD, they're starting to call it surplus. And we've got this new category of surplus funds, which is our funds that they've taken from the permanent fund dividend. They've moved over from the permanent fund dividend to the general budget, but they haven't yet appropriated. And they're starting to, so they're starting to categorize them as surplus funds. And you see this. Legislative Finance sent out a newsletter last week that includes an abbreviated fiscal summary for what's in the FY25 budget. And here's an interesting here's a paragraph that is comparable to the paragraph we saw in 2017 that said all of a sudden PFDs were no longer designated general funds. Based on the spring 2020 forecast, both the FY24 and FY25 budgets are projected to have surpluses, $128.8 million and $146.5 million, respectively. The FY24 surplus will lapse into the CBR, while any FY25 surplus will be available for appropriation next session. So basically, what we're doing is we're overtaxing, overcutting the PFD now in order to create this slush fund that we call surplus that will carry from one legislative session to the next. And if it's not appropriated the next legislative session, we'll go into the CBR. We're using excess PFD cuts now to start rebuilding the CBR. We've been doing that all along. When you see the CBR uptick, it's really just excess PFD cuts that are showing up in there. But now they're trying to formalize that by creating this category called surplus. And it's showing up in other strange ways. I mean, it's showing up as a rationalization for why the governor shouldn't be cutting things. For example, in an ADN editorial this weekend, the ADN says, this is about the blood bank and Dunleavy's cuts to the blood bank. It says Senator Kathy Giesel, a former nurse, said she had not heard a specific rationale at all about the cuts to the blood bank, and pointed out the fact that insofar as savings and fiscal stability are concerned, the operating and capital budgets included a surplus before the governor got out his red pen. So there's a surplus. Why should the governor be cutting it? It's the same thing that we saw last year in an editorial by Elise Galvin talking about the governor's budget partial veto of the line item veto of K through 12 spending. And in her editorial, she said, and there's a budget surplus. So what's the hang up? So what we've got going on, Michael, is they can't change the statute. They can't get the votes to change the statute about the PFD. So what they, and by they, I mean legislative leadership, because Delana Johnson has been right in there with everybody else calling it a surplus. What they, the legislative leadership, are doing is changing the language. First, it's no longer designated general funds. It's unrestricted general funds. So, hey, we can spend it on anything. And now it's no longer excess PFD cuts or cuts or revenues that should have gone toward the pay the PFD. All of a sudden, it's surplus. And now we can attack the governor for cutting spending by saying, hey, there's a surplus. So what's the problem? It's Orwellian. I won't try Orwellianization because I'll blow that. It's Orwellian in the sense that they can't change truth. They can't change the facts. They can't change the statute. They can't get the votes to change the statute. So they're just changing the language.
Well, it's kabuki theater, right? I mean, this is fiscal kabuki theater. Basically, they're doing what they're doing, and they're looking for a way to explain it to the average person who may understand the basics of a surplus versus a deficit versus, things like that. And so they frame it in such a way that it looks like, it makes their position look very reasonable. We already had a surplus. Why would the governor cut more since we had a surplus? Do we need a surplus? I mean, we're just spending reasonably. We had a surplus. And they keep saying that, but of course, nobody ever talks about, the first thing that they pick up at the beginning of the next year is the overspend from the previous year, right? I mean, there's always a fiscal, I've forgotten the word right off the top of my head here, but, by the way, we overspent from last year, so we need to true up last year. So
Supplemental.
How much is that? Yeah, supplemental budget. There you go. Sorry. Supplemental budget. So, I mean, it's just another way for them to, like you said, capture the language or explain away and justify what they're doing and making it sound so reasonable, right? They've used this kind of language in the past for different things, not just this time, but this is just another one where it's just it's like the idea of using designated funds versus dedicated funds, because the dedicated funds are prohibited by the Constitution, but we can designate funds all we want. It's the same kind of thing, right? I mean, it's like, wait a second, what is that?
And then even though they meet the definition of designated funds, we'll treat them as something else. It's being used for other things. So you have candidates out there that are campaigning on the fact that there's a surplus. I not only balance the budget, but there's a surplus. So you got candidates out there claiming to be fiscal conservatives, claiming to be fiscal hawks, when they've cut the PFD hugely, and cut it even another $150 million in this case, another $150 million to create this surplus so they can go around campaigning on the fact and we have a budget surplus. And then, as you say, when they get into the next session, they go, oh, heck, we had a surplus left over from last session. And so, we can spend that surplus because, we got these extra funds that came in from the from the last budget, and we can cut the PFD again so we can have more money in this session. But now we can use PFD cuts, excess PFD cuts we made in the last session. It is, for a while, I thought Ledge Finance was going to sort of straighten out and play the game straight, but now they're in on it. I mean, this recent fiscal note, this recent fiscal newsletter is coming from Legislative Finance, and they're the ones that are explaining, there's this surplus. Certainly they're doing it in Burt's direction, but they're still,
It's curiouser and curiouser for sure. It's that capturing of the language and, again, trying to explain away what they're doing and justify it. We'll continue with Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Number 2 is directly ahead, The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
I just love. I mean, I just love the mental gymnastics you've got to go through to follow this stuff. Can't have dedicated funds, but we've got designated funds. And then when the designated fund part doesn't work out, we just redefine that as something else. And then we throw in new phrases that will confuse you, which we've never used before, this idea of a surplus. And now we'll justify everything we're doing by saying, well, he's not being reasonable because he's cutting and we already had a surplus. It's just, again, it's kabuki. They're shuffling stuff around and trying to justify to you how they're spending billions of dollars. And it's just so reasonable, and we should just all get with the program, essentially.
Well,
Why?
it's 1984. It's George Orwell. It is changing the language to justify, acts that it's the use of the language that isn't normal use of the language to cover what they're doing. And it's wrong. I mean, I know there's only so many times I can say that, but they are conveying a meaning to Alaskans that is not what they're actually doing. They're conveying the meaning that we're creating surpluses, that we have a surplus. It's not like oil prices went up to the point we have, in the old use of the term, where we have a budget surplus, where we have more revenues from traditional sources than we can spend. It's and they ought to go to the SBR, they ought to go to the CBR. It's not like that. They're creating these additional revenues through deep PFD cuts, through deep cuts in something that's designated by the statute. And then they're calling that surplus. They're calling, if you think of PFD cuts, as I know Randy doesn't, but if you think of PFD cuts in the way that Matt Berman thinks of them, as taxes or as takes of income, reductions in income from Alaska families, it's excess taxes. What they're doing is making excess taxes to create this surplus for them to use, for them to go campaign on, and for them to use in attacking the governor, and for them to use in a subsequent budget cycle.
Yeah, no, it's frustrating. Ben Carpenter said, I thought the argument was that PFDs aren't affordable any longer. Or was it the dividends should only be paid from surpluses, right? I mean, it gets so confusing in there. I mean, nobody can kind of keep track what's going on. But the bottom line is that they're taking more money, and that surplus should have gone to the people to begin with. And instead, they're just overtaxing you and then justifying that money to then be used later on or to go back and pay the CPR. It basically prevents them from having to be fiscally responsible in the moment, because they could pass everything on down the road, right?
Yeah, and when you think about it in the context of the CBR, that the surplus then spills over to the CBR, what's really going on is we way overspent in the early 2010s. We spent on roads, bridges, we spent on all sorts of different things in the early 20 teens and drained the CBR. Now they're trying to pay the CBR back, but they don't want to pay it back from all of the Alaskans who benefited from that overspending, probably 50% of whom have moved out of state by now. They don't want to pay it back from all of those Alaskans who benefited from the overspending. They want to pay it back from middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts. So the top 20%, oil and non-residents, dodge again. So it's sort of this concept of surplus sort of cascades into, and we get to keep taking more from middle and lower income Alaska families, and we get to keep taking more from middle, and we get to overtax them more. It's just it's using the language in a way that is not the common, ordinary, understood meaning of the terms.
Well, again, and the thing is, this is all a justification. Like you said, you keep seeing it now in this idea, both Elise Galvin last year and Kathy Giesel this year saying, we've got a surplus. Why are they cutting? We've got a surplus. Why are they cutting? But it's a fictitious surplus that's basically been ginned up on the backs of Alaskan people. And that's why they're cutting. And that's why some of these cuts are occurring. But again, it makes them sound so reasonable. And that's where the danger is, I think, because the average person is not deep enough in the budget to understand these things. And he hears the word surplus and they're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, we shouldn't cut. We've got a surplus. Why would we do that? Again, it's capturing that low information voter to basically make them understand it. All right, Brad Keithley is our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Here we go.
public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke show.
Oh, yeah. Let's continue on here. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is our guest. The weekly top 3 continues. We're jumping into it now, revisiting something we talked a little bit about last week, and that is the Alaska Anomaly. Brad, remind us of what that was before we jump back into this here so that people can understand where we're at here.
So the Alaska Anomaly is that most consider us a low tax or a no tax state, but we're losing population. When tax people do an analysis, or when fiscal people in DC do an analysis, they explain the population shift that's going on in the country, the exit from New York, the exit from California, the growth in Florida, the growth in Texas. They explain that in terms of low taxes. They said, well, you have a low tax jurisdiction, and so that's attracting people from high tax jurisdictions. Well, on the standard they use, which is looking at the standard definitions of tax, income tax, sales tax, property tax, on the standard definitions they use, Alaska is virtually a no tax state. We have no statewide sales tax. We have no statewide income tax. We have no statewide property tax. And as a consequence, we're basically a no tax state. Yet, as we discussed last week, Alaska finishes in the bottom 5 in terms of migration patterns. Not only are people not coming to Alaska, they're leaving Alaska. And so we're seeing this out migration. And to some degree, people have said, oh, this out migration is a temporary thing. It has to do with oil. It has to do with a bunch of other stuff. And we will turn around at some point, and we'll start having in-migration again. Alaska will start growing in population. Well, as James Brooks reports in an Alaska Beacon article last week, that's not happening. The demographers, how's that for a word? The demographers at the Alaska Department of Labor have issued a new update that says that predicts a population drop. The headline on James's article is Alaska demographers predict population drop, a switch from prior forecasts. So now we're no longer trying to excuse this population shift as this out migration that we've been having. We're no longer trying to excuse it as a temporary thing. Now we're admitting it's a long-term thing. How does that happen when you look at the stuff that comes from DC? How does that happen in a no tax state? The response is interesting to the Alaska Labor Department publication. You know, you've seen people say, well, we need more education spending. How are we going to stop this population, this out migration? We need more education spending, say some Democrats. We need more energy subsidies, say some Republicans. We need more infrastructure, say both Democrats and Republicans. We need defined benefits, government defined benefits to keep people in the state, says Kathy Giesel. But I don't think they're looking at this the right way. Let's go back to last week's analysis. When you look at low tax states, what's really going on is the low tax states have low government spend, and they spread the burden not the best way in the world. They spread it largely through sales and property tax, but they spread the burden broadly so that at least it picks up some contribution from non-residents, and at least it picks up some contribution from the top 20%. And so you have a much lower per capita or much lower per person charge to pay for government, and government is lower spending in the first place. So you have a low tax state because the government's not spending a whole lot, and it is spreading the burden broadly so that no one given segment is bearing a big share of it. That's the exact reverse from what's going on in Alaska. Alaska is actually, when you look at it on a per capita basis or any sort of basis, it's a high spend state. And we have high spending on a per capita basis. Now, people will rationalize that we're largely rural, we're a big state, we've got to, things cost more, we got to spend more. But I don't care how you rationalize it. The fact is we're a high cost state. And unlike Florida and Texas, we're concentrating that burden. We're not spreading it across all the population and including non-residents by having a broad-based revenue source to cover that spending. We're concentrating it on middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts. We're concentrating the burden on middle and lower income Alaska, on the middle, those in the middle and lower income brackets, unlike the low tax states. So Alaska is doing the reverse. And guess what's happening as a result? We're losing people. We're losing people. And where are we losing people? We're losing people in the working age population. Those that are 60 and older, that segment of Alaska is actually increasing. Population's actually increasing when you measure it by the number of income tax returns filed. It's that population is actually increasing. The decrease is going on in the middle and lower income brackets. $200,000 and below is where we're losing people that are age 60 and below. So the Alaska anomaly is we have what people think is a low tax state, but we're still losing people. But if you think through it, we're losing people because we're actually a high cost, high tax state. We are, from the perspective of middle and lower income Alaska families, we are the equivalent of California or New York because we're putting the entire fiscal burden on them. It shouldn't be any surprise that we're losing people. It shouldn't be any surprise that we're going to continue to lose people, that we're going to continue on this downward spiral as long as we have high government costs and we continue to put them entirely on middle and lower income Alaska families. Those people are going to continue to leave. And that's what explains the Alaska anomaly. It's not, oh, we need more education spending, or we need more energy subsidies, say George Roush or other Republicans, or we need more infrastructure, or we need more defined benefits. It's not any of the mores, it's the less.
Right.
And it's the spread the burden broadly as opposed to concentrating it on middle and lower income Alaska families.
And this is, again, part of the problem of why it's driving it out. Donna said earlier, Donna Ardwin said her firm shows the absolute correlation between taxes and outmigration. Alaska's recognized as a high tax state. Wait until you add an income tax or something else, and then that exodus will actually speed up. We talked about that previously. It's like the doom loop, right? I mean, once you reach that point of, and that's what, like California and New York, that's what they're experiencing at this point. And Alaska, if the spending continues without any capping or anything else, this is what we're going to see here, is a continual outmigration that will actually increase.
But we're already seeing it, Michael, and we don't have. I mean, those people who understand what PFD cuts are do see it as a high tax state. But generally speaking, when you go to the Tax Foundation and the other national institutes that look at ITEP and other national institutes that look at Alaska, they call it a low tax state. And you talk to legislators and they'll say, oh, it's a low tax state. We have no tax. We have no statewide taxes. We need to keep it that way, says Zach Fields or Andy Josephson. That's what we need. We need to spend more, but we need to keep it a low tax state. How do we do that? We use it by calling things surpluses and unrestricted general funds. And we take money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. And they're showing us how they react to that. They're leaving. That's what the numbers show. So, you cannot, the Alaska anomaly is explained by the fact it's not an anomaly. The Alaska anomaly that some people say is the Alaska anomaly is a low tax state, but we're still losing population. Well, it's not an anomaly because we're not a low tax state. We are, when you take into account the PFD and the burden that puts on middle and lower income Alaska families, we're actually a very high tax state in league with California and New York and the other states that are losing population.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. So, Brad, how do we overcome this? I mean, because again, now this James Brooks article talks about now they're no longer looking at these rosy forecasts. They're saying that by 2050, we'll have, another 30,000 or so fewer residents than we did that we do today, and it's just going to continue. That outmigration is going to continue. So, what's it take to tip the balance back the other way?
We have politicians and policymakers like Ben Carpenter who call the truth and say, look, we do have taxes, we do have burdens, we are taking revenue from segments of the Alaska population. We need to spread that out more broadly to lower the impact on the people who are leaving, to lower the impact on middle and lower income Alaska families. And in doing that, we're also going to generate pushback on additional government spending, because government spending will no longer be free to those in the top 20% and non-residents and the oil companies. That's the way you do it. You admit what PFD cuts are. You admit they are burdens, taxes on middle and lower income Alaska families. You say we can't concentrate that burden because they're leaving. We don't need to spend more, take more from them in order to create more toys out there in terms of higher K through 12 and other things. We don't need to increase the burden on them. We need to lower the burden on them in two ways. One, by spreading that burden to include people who are currently getting off in Governor Hammond's term scot-free. And second, we need to then start reducing the burden on everybody, as happens in actual low tax states.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Brad, that's number 2. Give us a tease for number 3.
Number 3 is, what is number 3? No, number 3 is, does Ethan Schutt's reappointment to the Permanent Fund Board put the Permanent Fund Board back on the right track?
All right, we continue here in just a moment. Brad Keithley continues with us again for the weekly top 3 and Truth Tuesdays. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Ben Carpenter says, so we're both a low tax state and a high spend state, but are we a prosperous state? And I mean, that's the $1 million question. And I think the answer to that is pretty much at this point, no, because we know where this is going to all end up in the long run. I mean, right?
And the answer is, we aren't a low tax state. The low tax state should have had quotes around it. We aren't a low tax state. We are a high tax. When you take into account PFD cuts, we are a high tax state, and those high taxes are high takes of revenue. If I'm dealing with Randy, those high takes of revenue are coming from a targeted segment of the population, middle and lower income Alaska families. And when you look at where the out migration is occurring, it's middle and lower income Alaska families at working age, middle and lower income Alaska families. So low tax state should be in quotes.
Yeah, no, it should be. He also said, so rather than a permanent fund earnings flowing into the private economy, it's flowing, this is on your previous comment, it's flowing into the CBR. So it's like the private economy doesn't matter to some, which again, this is the whole point, right? The private economy, as long as the public economy is protected and they have those monies from the fund, and they can get the fund up to $100 billion, so they can just draw, nothing else matters at that point. As long as they can get their kick and their chunk of money, it's all good.
And that's, it's coming back into the Alaskan anomaly, Michael. I mean, we got declining population. Ooh, we need to spend more. We need to spend more on K through 12. We need to drive this state deeper into the ground. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from middle and lower income Alaska families. And who's leaving? Middle and lower income. We need to drive that stake until they're gone, until we've turned this state into a high income haven it's a high income
haven of government only employees, because they're the only ones that can remain, and whatever service industry can service them, and the rest of it's just like, there you go. I mean, where do you go from there? Right? I mean, once you've got nothing but government employees, because they're the only ones that can afford to stay, and the service industries that keep them, it's almost like, because again, the fewer people that are here, the less services the state has to provide, and they could just keep kind of, it's frustrating. Kyle
The
Johansson.
more services they can provide, the more employees they need to provide fewer to less people, right? We can have more K-12 for 50% less people.
For less people. And then Kyle says CBR payback is a constitutional requirement. Is a constitution no longer? Nobody's saying not to pay back the CBR, Kyle. But that again, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Where is the rest of that money going to come from? I mean, we owe it what, I think $7 billion or $8 billion at this point. It's supposed to have a $10 billion balance. And I mean, nobody said not to pay it, but I mean, this is not a dig at not putting money in the CBR. This is kind of this fictitious shell game that they're playing with the finances to show, oh, well, if we don't use it, it'll go into the CBR.
I've been one of the biggest advocates, and Kyle knows this, I've been one of the biggest advocates of paying back the CBR. I've written article after article, commentary after commentary about the need to pay back the CBR. But we need to pay back the CBR from the people who benefited, from the top 20%, from the non-residents, from all those people who got the benefits of taking down the CBR in the early 20 teens. And what we're doing with this surplus is we're paying it sneakily. We're paying back the CBR from middle and lower income Alaska families through deeper PFD cuts, excess PFD cuts. And I absolutely, we need to pay back the CBR, but we need to pay it back from the people who benefited, or at least since 50% of those people are gone from the early 20 teens because of the outmigration, we need to pay it back at least from the same income brackets that got the benefits of that massive spending that occurred in the early 20 teens. Kyle and I have these half arguments. It's yes, absolutely, we need to pay back the CBR, but it's who we need to pay back the CBR from. Who needs to contribute to that process? That's the issue.
Right. It's a broad thing. You can't just continue to hang the burden on the lower income, the lower 80%.
Middle and lower income.
Yeah. I mean, well, you just can't keep hanging the bill on them and then expect it's all going to be, gravy. Everybody's got to pay that back. We all, quote unquote, benefited from it. So we should all have to pay it back together, I guess, which is the more frustrating thing. All right, let's see. Gary says, this is beating a dead horse by saying taking the PFD is a tax on middle and lower income families. Everybody here already agrees. Saying this here week after week goes nowhere. But the thing is, we may agree with it, but not everybody else is understanding that. That's the problem. Here on the program, we may understand that, deeply and agree with it. But the problem is not everybody is in agreement with that. A lot of mainstream people, just regular folks who are not paying attention to this, they don't know that, Gary. That's the problem. And that's why I think Brad keeps repeating it over and over and over again. All right, we're down to the last segment here. Let's jump back into it. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is our guest. We continue with the weekly top 3 on this Truth Tuesday. The final one is the discussion on the Permanent Fund Board. This has been a topic on and off for weeks here on the program with all the different furor that's going on over the permanent fund and unethical behavior and ignoring the legislature and all the other things that are going on. But don't worry, the governor is now reappointed. Shoot back to the thing. Is this a good thing or a bad thing, Brad? Where are we at?
So one of the things that in the leaked emails from the permanent fund staff was an email that said that Ellie Rubenstein, who's vice chair of the board, currently the vice chair of the board, Ellie Rubenstein had said that the staff should know that the governor won't be reappointing Ethan Schutt, who was the chairman of the board. And since Ellie's the vice chairman of the board, one would think that she said that in order to give them some indication that she was likely to ascend to chair, that Ethan wasn't going to be reappointed, that and that she was going to have more complete control of the board than she had even at that point. So, go talk to the people I want you to talk to was sort of the rollout of that string of emails. Ethan has been chair of the Permanent Fund Board. Ethan's term expired on June 30th. And unlike other state agencies or state positions, you don't carry over a board member on the Permanent Fund Board doesn't carry over past the end of the term until his successor is appointed. The end of his term means the end of the person's term, means the end of the person's term. When we got to June 30th, the governor hadn't appointed anybody. He hadn't reappointed Ethan. He hadn't appointed anybody else to take that seat. And so Ellie, as vice chair, all of a sudden became acting chair because she was the vice chair. And there was a lot of speculation about what the heck the administration was doing now. Were they going to try to leave that seat vacant in order so Ellie could just, automatically roll up to chair? That didn't seem like a good idea after all the chaos that she'd caused earlier in the year. But what were they going to do? Last week, the governor finally acted and reappointed without any discussion, without any explanation, posted on the state website that Ethan had been reappointed as a director of the Permanent Fund Board. And that doesn't mean he's chairman. The governor doesn't name the chairman. The Permanent Fund Board members elect the chairman, but at least that part of Ellie's predictions didn't come to pass, and the governor reappointed. Now the question is, okay, does that mean the Permanent Fund Board is now back on an even keel? We can stop worrying about it. All's right with the world, and everything is going to be hunky dory from here on in. No, it doesn't mean that at all. First, it's not automatic that Ethan continues as chairman. Plus, Ethan's has been outvoted. He and Craig Richards have been outvoted 4-2 on a number of recent initiatives, with Ellie leading the 4 against Ethan's 2. So just because he's back on the board, A, doesn't mean he's chairman, and with whatever power that has, and B, it doesn't mean that the votes are going to go any different, because the 4, Ellie and the 3 commissioners, 2 commissioners appointed by Dunleavy plus Jason Bruni, it doesn't mean that they're going to change their voting pattern. So it doesn't mean that. What it means is it didn't get worse. He didn't appoint another sycophant. There we go. There's an N in there. Sycophant. He didn't appoint another sycophant on the board to go along with Ellie. That Ethan has stood up to Ellie in the past, and presumably may continue to do so. And the governor didn't appoint another sycophant on the board that would just vote with Ellie and make these into 5-1 votes as opposed to 4-2 votes. So in some sense, it sort of stops the bleeding where it was. We're still bleeding, but we're not bleeding further. But I would argue it also passes up an opportunity actually to make the board better. As we've talked about on the show before, in other jurisdictions, the requirement for a board member like Texas has 2 permanent funds. In Texas, the requirement for a board member is they have a substantial background and expertise in investments, the very business that these permanent fund boards are in. We don't have that requirement in Alaska. And Ethan is really just another sort of broad-based community member. He doesn't have any special expertise in investments or in the investment industry or how to make investments. And so the governor had an open seat. He could have appointed somebody who actually had substantial background and expertise in investments, could have progressed the board by doing that. But he chose not to. So we've sort of stopped the bleeding in a way. We still have a 4-2 majority that goes against Ethan and Craig Richards. That follows Ellie. We've sort of stopped the bleeding in that it's not going to get worse. It doesn't go to 5-1, but he passed up an opportunity to make it better. And so I don't think this is an indication that we're going back to the good times or back to where we were or that we need to stop worrying about the Permanent Fund Board. I think it means that we've still got big worries, just not bigger worries maybe than what we
Right.
had before.
I mean, he had an opportunity here if he had put, because obviously Ellie has some background in investing and things like that. He had the opportunity to put somebody on the board who also had investment experience and things like that, and could be a counter to her arguments from that perspective. But instead, he just put Shoot back in there, and so it's kind of a status quo. It's not good. It's not bad. I mean, it's not better. It's not worse. It's just kind of continuing on, which seems to be a habit of what we've got going on here.
That's a great point, Michael. I mean, people sometimes say, well, the Permanent Fund Board isn't responsible for much. But one of the things they always outline the Permanent Fund Board is responsible for is allocating investments in categories. Annually, they step back and they say, how much do we want in fixed return? How much do we want in opportunity return, private equity, and those sorts of things? How much do we want in the stock market? That's a huge decision. And it really takes investment understanding to understand what those allocations ought to be. And that's one thing the board does. Right now, Ellie, I mean, as you point out, Ellie's the only one on the board who really has experience, background in that. I mean, Ryan Anderson, who's the Commissioner of Transportation, is on the board, has no experience in that. Adam Crum would tell you he does, but he doesn't. Jason Bruni, I don't know what Jason Bruni would tell you, but he doesn't. Craig Richards doesn't really have that background either. And Ethan doesn't. So it really leaves Ellie as the only one who's really had some familiarity with that. So when she speaks, she's got the authority of somebody who actually does have some of that background. And, you know, she's got her father's whispering in her ear also as background to that. We need a counterweight. It would have been great to have a counterweight to that on the board, but the governor passed up the opportunity, leaving Ellie essentially as the only voice that has experience in the area.
And as we've talked about in the past, and I think as Kyle mentions here in the chat room as well, the entire statute needs to be rewritten, that we must have legislative confirmation. Should we be just basically be rewriting a requirement for board members that they have some experience, like the Texas statute that you were just quoting?
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about it on the show. I've written columns on it that Kyle may or may not have read. I've written columns on that we need to be restructuring the board to include legislative confirmation, but legislative confirmation itself is not enough. We need to restructure the requirements of the board to match what you see in other sovereign wealth funds, to match what you see in Texas, to match what you see in New Mexico, to match what you see in Norway, to match what you see in Saudi. We need to rewrite the requirements so that the members have substantial experience and knowledge about investments, about the very thing that's going on. Maybe one or two members from the community to sort of add a community gloss on that. A community test would be useful, but we need people on there who really understand the investment community and are good supervisors of those who are making these decisions. So yes, we need to rewrite the statute. We need to restructure the board to include legislative confirmation, but that's not enough. We need to rewrite the requirements as well.
We definitely need a counterweight for what Ellie's doing. I mean, I think that is, I think that's important. Like hire professionals. Perish the thought that we should hire professionals in this, in that industry or in that business who understand it. All right, Brad. Well, we got about just over 90 seconds here, so I'll give you a chance to finalize and sum up your thoughts for all three of the weekly top threes today. Weave them together and give me the answer here.
What's the theme? The theme is, I think, that we are ignoring reality. We're using words to ignore reality. We're calling things that are excess cuts surpluses now. We called them, they used to be designated. Now we call them unrestricted. We are changing we can't change this. They can't change the statute. So they're changing the language instead. The Alaska Anomaly isn't really an anomaly once you truly understand what's going on, that we are a high tax state. The high tax is on middle and lower income Alaska families, 80% of Alaska families, and they're the ones leaving.
And of course, the fact is that the permanent fund, as it continues this way, is endangering the permanent fund. I mean, that's the thing in the long run. The permanent fund and the dividend itself, very dangerous. And of course, does it play into their whole point of wanting to make sure that they get that $100 billion so they don't have to worry about anybody else? The private sector doesn't matter. That's a bigger question, I guess, for another day. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you coming on board and joining us.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we've got more coming up. Hour 2 is dead ahead. Chris Story is going to finish up the hour for us with a little bit of uplift and weekly life coaching. And then you and I will chat about some of this and kind of continue on this discussion. Up next, The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. I mean, oof. And Ben just kind of highlights what I was just saying there at the end. Recent reallocation towards more private equity investment means increased risk that fund income will be inadequate to meet earnings draws in the future, all in an effort to grow the fund to $100 billion as soon as possible. Slow and steady wins the race was really the theme of the permanent fund for decades. And now it's like, oh, we need to get that $100 billion mark. So how do we do it quickly, even though there's a higher risk factor involved and everything else? Because, again, that is the ultimate goal, right? $100 billion means they can ignore everything else in the state just to spin off what they need.
Michael, I've started to wonder if that's really the goal. I mean, the $100 billion, they're explaining the $100 billion in a way that is part of the piece of the rationalization for unifying the earnings reserve and the permanent fund corpus. It's being used as, we need to unify the two together because that'll enable us. That's part of what will enable us to grow it to $100 billion. And that'll, enable the top 20% to live rent free forever and ever. And the oil companies and the non-residents to live rent free forever and ever. That's part of the rationalization. But really what the whole unification of in what I'm increasingly understanding is the unification of the earnings reserve and the permanent fund corpus is really just to provide access to the permanent fund corpus. So that when we get to the end of the permanent fund dividend cuts, most people say, well, we're going to go to taxes. Or when we run out of the permanent fund dividend, most people say we're going to go to taxes. If you unify the earnings reserve and the permanent fund corpus, what you've really set up is you can just kick over and start drawing down the corpus because you've set up there's not a stop there. You don't run out of the earnings reserve at some point and have to stop drawing. You can just keep drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing once you make that unification. So I'm curious whether the $100 billion. I'm increasingly skeptical whether the $100 billion is an objective in and of it itself, or it's just an excuse to do the unification of the two funds and set up the ability to draw down the permanent fund corpus as a way of continuing to avoid taxes going on into the future.
That's an interesting take and that would actually play into their modus operandi of not having a long-term fiscal plan. As long as they get theirs while they're here and it's in their lifetime or in their, then they can retire and move away or whatever else. They don't care. I mean, if they draw down the permanent fund, and they don't have to pay the consequences down the road, and they could still be the heroes for avoiding taxes, right? Because now they could say, well, we don't want taxes. We'll just overdraw the permanent fund until they draw that down to nothing. I mean, you could be right. I could be wrong where I said, I think if there's going to be taxes, discussion on taxes in 3 years. You're right. Maybe they avoid that whole discussion. And with all the Republicans who are like, I'd rather have no permanent fund than taxes. The thing is, then they don't know that we're eating our seed corn, and what it'll do is create an even bigger problem down the road.
And what we'll do is we'll create a new word, just like the permanent fund dividends are no longer designated. All of a sudden, by magic, they're unrestricted, and just like excess permanent fund dividend cuts, excess PFD cuts are now surplus. They'll create a new word to Orwellianize the drawdown of the permanent fund corpus. I think the real driver, in all honesty, the more I think about this, the more time I spend with these issues, the more I understand the motivations, think about the motivations of the various actors in this. I think the real driver at the end of the day is for the top 20%, the oil industry and the non-resident industries, tourism, fishing, to avoid taxes at all costs. And that explains why we drained the CBR or the SBR. That explains then why we've drained the CBR. That explains why we're draining permanent fund dividends. And I don't think it stops when we get to the end of permanent fund dividends. I think the unification, I think the key to understanding Alaska's future is this whole debate about the unification of the earnings reserve and the permanent fund corpus. And I think if they, and all of the arguments are really around trying to get those two unified. So once they're unified, then you can draw down the permanent fund corpus. Then you've set up the ability to draw down the permanent fund corpus. And I think, Bert's movement of $8 billion out of the earnings reserve over to the permanent fund corpus so we could claim there's an earnings reserve crisis out there. I think that was part of it. I think the $100 billion, frankly, is probably part of it. It's all to set up a situation where the top 20%, this generation's top 20%, and the next generation's top 20%, the oil companies and the non-resident industries never have to contribute. It's all taken off the backs of middle and lower income Alaska families.
I mean, it's spooky, but I've often said and been saying for 25 years on this program that the main goal is to get to the corpus, that the corpus is the piggy bank that they cannot help but look at adoringly and say, this is what we really need, is we really need to get our hands on that. So you're right. I mean, if they are able to combine the funds, that will be the next step, is probably to drain that down because, hey, I don't have to take care of it. If they drain it an extra $1 billion a year, what do they get? Another 40 years out of it before their earnings start really, are they able to do that? I mean, possibly, if they're eating into it $1 billion a year as it goes forward and it remains steady. That's a scary proposition right there.
I think the permanent fund board is playing part of creating this crisis around the earnings reserve to justify the unification of the two funds. I think the permanent fund board is in on this. And that's why you don't want somebody with investment experience in there, because they'll understand it and say, wait, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So the $100 billion I've become skeptical of as a target in and of itself. If it is, it's only to get there so we can slide backwards.
Well, thanks for that load of great stuff. All right. Thanks so much. Brad Keithley, Alaska's First Sustainable Budget. Appreciate you coming on board.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, we're out of time. We got to go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back right after this.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station, and or FM translator. It is the Michael Duke Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska from our secret undisclosed location in the Matsu Valley. All right. Brad just hit us with it was all fun and games until we came to the final commercial break, and then Brad dropped the bomb on us here that really got me thinking now. My brain is kind of racing over, kind of pulling all these separate pieces together and basically saying, well, here's what it looks like to me. And what does it look like to Brad? Well, remember, we've been talking about the permanent fund. And one of the goals that came out here a couple of years ago was there were a lot of legislators talking about getting the corpus of the fund, the main earning body of the fund, the one that's out of reach of politicians at this point. It's constitutionally protected. One of the things that they've been talking about is getting the value of the corpus of the permanent fund up to $100 billion, which, I mean, most Alaskans would be like, hey, the higher the permanent fund, the better. We like that, right? I mean, that's sure. We're all in support. We would all want that, wouldn't we? Except for when you start realizing what they want to do and what they're really looking for in that $100 billion is they're looking for basically a string-free revenue source, a revenue source that they can count on no matter what, and that they don't have to be beholden to anybody for. As we've talked about in the past, all the 49 other states in the country rely on the private sector for their governmental funding, right? I mean, they rely on the private sector because the way that they fund their state government is through some form of taxation. So whether it's an income tax, a state property tax, a sales tax, whatever it is that they're doing, the state is reliant, the state government is reliant on private people in the private sector generating the revenue that allows government to operate. In Alaska, we've got a totally different take on this because the vast majority of our revenue for the state government has, up until recently, basically been through the form of royalty and corporate taxes and things like that in the oil industry. And then it's been supplemented the last handful of years by the draw from the earnings reserve account, right? The earnings reserve account. Which is the money that has been deposited into the fund and then spins off into the earnings reserve account. And then they've been drawing on that to help fund government. So in the one way, everybody's like, oh yeah, we'd love to see the permanent fund as high as it can be. The problem is that when it reaches that $100 billion mark, is that then the legislature is free to continually draw off at a 5% rate of return, which is the kind of the estimated, rate of return. They're able to easily draw off $5 billion every year moving forward to fund state government with no ramifications, no strings attached, no, a complete divorcement from the reality of what the private sector is doing in the state of Alaska. So we've kind of known about this for a while because that has been what they've said, pretty publicly, is that if we could get it to $100 billion, then we can then fund state government and we don't have to worry about, but now this presupposes one thing and that I think is that they really haven't considered. And that is, of course, the nature of government at this point is to grow and continually grow, and that their appetite for spend will probably within a few short years rapidly outpace that $5 billion draw because government's going to government, right? It's going to get bigger. It's going to have to go up. I mean, they've got built-in escalators in the state government and in the budgets that will automatically go up 150. And now somebody I can't remember who it was last week or the week before was talking about how those escalators, because it's normally $100 to $150 billion a year increase. If the legislature did nothing but rubber stamp whatever's automatically built into the budget, it would be $100 to $150 million increase every year. And then somebody said I think it was last week, I'm trying to remember if it was Mike Shower or somebody else, but basically saying, well, with some of the new things that have been put in, some of the newer things that are putting in, that number is going to go up to 200, potentially 250. Where it will increase. And this includes the employee contracts and other things that have all these built-in automatic escalators in them. So, I mean, if you start talking about adding $200 million a year, if nothing else changes, all things being equal, nothing else, it's just it's flat with the exception of those escalators that are built in. That means that every 5 years you've added another $1 billion to the budget. That doesn't take too long until you're, again, upside down if you're drawing $5 billion. But then Brad threw this other wrench into that whole thing where he said his thoughts are now on the $100 billion is that he says it's not what we think it is. He said, yes, they obviously want to do that draw, but he said, and I've alluded to this in the past, but this was a way, in my opinion, this whole discussion that you're hearing now, the white paper that came out from the Permanent Fund Board about how the earnings reserve is in danger, right? because we didn't have enough money in it to pay out. And so what we really needed to do is we needed to, and Bert Stedman was talking about this, fold the earnings reserve into the corpus of the fund to protect the earnings reserve. But basically that would then open up the corpus of the fund for that draw from the PFD. And Brad is saying in his mind, it's no longer just about drawing that 5% out. What they want is they want access to the full corpus, because then they can spend and overspend and just slowly draw down the corpus of the fund, again, completely divorced from what's going on in the private sector. And if they only overdrew it by $1 billion a year, I mean, what would it be? 10 years, 15 years before it really started to affect the income earning potentials of the fund. And then, of course, it's an accelerating loop. And that's what they really want. They want that piggy bank, that juicy pot of money in the corpus of the fund, whatever $80 billion that it is now, something like that, is just way too juicy a target for do-gooders who feel like they know better than you how they should spend your money. And it's like money is a drug, and they want all the money in the world. Just give it to me. Just slap it right here into my vein. Just give it all to me right now. And I really hadn't considered that somebody would be so blatantly short-sighted. But then it came to me during this conversation with Brad, then it came to me that the fact that many of these people only want another 10 or 20. I mean, they will do anything to avoid taxes, right? And they've got the useful idiots on their side, on the Republican conservative side or whatever, who basically say anything but taxes. We'll do anything to avoid taxes. Which, again, while I applaud the sentiment of taxation is theft and, everything else, the problem is that they will use the useful idiots who say, anything but taxes, and allow that to justify the eating away of the corpus of the fund, this doom loop, which will cover their asses for another 20 to 25 years. And then they'll pull the ripcord, leave the state, do whatever they need to do, and we'll be left cleaning up the mess. I mean, this is the only way that I see it at this point. Right? That what Brad just brought to light really made me think about it in a different way. I knew that they wanted the $100 billion because they want $5 billion strings free, no attachments, no recriminations, no repercussions, to use however they want because they don't care about the private sector. But I never thought about it in a way of saying it was going to grow so much that what they were going to do is they were just going to start, again, eating into the seed corn of the investment of the corpus of the fund, and that they could slowly do that over a period of years and then wash their hands of it and go, now it's somebody else's problem. I mean, just think about that. If you plan on staying in this state or having your kids stay in this state, I mean, I plan on being here another 20 years, another 25 years, another 30 years, God willing, and the creek don't rise. Do these people, are they just going to feather their nests and then jerk the ripcord and go to Hawaii and move to Hawaii or move to Arizona or someplace else and be like, now I made all my money. You guys can, doing anything they can to avoid taxes and having to pay for government and basically eat all that seed corn? And some of the people must be feeling it. I mean, why do we have this outflow? Because I think people feel like their deck is rigged. They can't get ahead. They don't see any changes coming from the legislature. And they're like, I better pull this ripcord early because I'm not going to stick around and watch what happens when the yogurt hits the rotor. I mean, that's why we've got an outflow. And now for the first time, again, Brad pointed out this article from James Brooks over at the Alaska Beacon, which if you haven't gone and read it, it's a super interesting article about what demographers are saying over at the Department of Labor, where for decades they have projected for a population rise in the state but it's just never happened. Since 2020, they've been predicting a rise in the population. I mean, as little as back in 2015, just 9 short years ago, they said we should be upwards of 130 or 830,000 residents. And yet it's slowly tapered off until we're now, for the first time ever, they've said it's basing their forecast on a 30-year average and extending the current trend in the future. The state's population is going to drop from the 736,000 down to 720,000. And this is just their forecast on it. And it's a curve going down, folks. It's a curve going down. And what does that say to some of your legislators? Oh, good. Fewer people to provide services from. And now we can use that money for better things that we want to do. So less Alaskans consuming the money that we're spending that we need to. So that's good. Now we can do more things. I mean, in 1998, the Department of Labor expected that the state would have 843,000 plus new residents by 2018. They were only off by 110,000 people because it was 738,000. I mean, a long-term decline. The Department of Labor's forecasts have said, with each new forecast through 2007, they'd grown a little bit more pessimistic, but this year's is the first to predict a long-term decline in growth in the state, a decline in the state of Alaska. Add that to the whole $100 billion. Add that to the fact that they could be eating the seed corn. Add that to this complete divorcement between the public and the private economies, and they don't really care. Oh, man. And what does that mean for some of the places like the interior where the cost of living keeps going up? What does that mean to some of the rural areas whose cost of living makes the interior look like they're living in the Cheapsville, USA? I mean, this is madness, man. Just total, complete madness. All right, we got more coming up. Just the more I think about this, I would say I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked, but I'm just kind of like one too many hits with a snake. I'm just like, wow. You know, when you start thinking about something from a different perspective, if that's the goal, to get a toll to the corpus of the fund and get theirs while the getting's good, it's worse than anything else I could have thought about. All right, we got to go. The Michael Dukes Show, Common Sense Radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Dukes Show.
And Ben Carpenter's in the chat room. I'm sorry. Sorry, somebody just sent me a text message about somebody who passed away. Okay. All right. Ben Carpenter's in the chat room in here, and Ben, I want your take on this, Ben. I'm going to call you. I'm going to abuse my privilege here and see if I could just call Ben and get him on the line. I don't know if he's listening still or if he just commented a second ago, but I thought I'd bring him on. We'll see if we can bring him on board real quick to talk about this. Hello.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Can I abuse my privilege and ask you to comment on what we were just talking about?
Yeah, I think Brad's spot on with the purposes that
Yeah.
he's alluding to.
No, yeah, I agree. If you hold the line a second, we'll pick it up on the radio side. But I mean, I hadn't even. I mean, I'd known about the 100 billion. I'd known one of the reasons why they didn't want to be beholden to the economy. I saw all those things, but then when he said the intent was to intentionally, and then all of a sudden it kind of solidified and crystallized, and I realized if that's the case, I could see why there's such a fervor to try and do it. And that's worrying to me. So, all right, Ben, well, we'll discuss this here in just a second. Ben Carpenter, sticking with us here for just a second before we jump into it with Chris Story. Ben Carpenter, or Timothy says, Ben Carpenter, he says, giving government money directly from the people is not a recipe for a smaller, limited government. Is quite the opposite. See the current income tax from its inception to now. Ben says, I agree. We shouldn't redistribute income taxes or sales taxes. Permanent fund earnings are not income taxes or sales taxes. It's true. I mean, it is a tax, but it's not an income tax or a sales tax. And Timothy, as much as I agree kind of with what you're saying, that there is no perfect system out there, the biggest problem here is that by avoiding taxes at all costs, we've essentially allowed for the unlimited growth of this government and encouraged it, and now are encouraging them to go and look for other means of avoiding the kind of responsibility or the again, the connectivity to the people, so they can do what they want regardless of what people in the state may want. That's the problem, and that's what I was just saying earlier, that there's a lot of people out there who are screaming, death or no death, no taxes, death or taxes. We'll over my dead body, I'll give up my PFD and you can take it and everything. But again, forgetting that a bully will take everything from you, right? A bully will take everything from you. If you give in and say, oh, you can take that, they'll just be back for more later. And they'll want more and more and more, and what'll happen is that, and we'll see. Fat Ray says, well, about that, California and New York have had an exodus. Have their taxes gone down? No, but inevitably they will have to. The whole idea here is to catch this before we reach that point. But they are seeing the effects. There is an effect, and people will vote with their feet. They will go somewhere else. So how do we avoid it before that? I mean, this is this. I know nobody wants to talk about taxes. I don't want to talk about taxes. But I also don't want them to permanently maim the state by draining the earnings reserve or the constitutional or the corpus of the fund moving forward. All right, we're gonna jump back into this here. Ben Carpenter is going to be with us here for just a second. Where is the thing here? All right. So we'll continue here. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Please like and share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the YouTube-y stuff and everything else. We'll get more people involved right now. Here we go. Like, share, subscribe.
The Michael Duke Show, proudly splitting the left versus right dichotomy. Yeah, I had to look that word up too. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. Here he is, though. That guy, Michael Dukes, the one with the show.
Yeah. I mean, the left versus right dichotomy is a real thing. Just in case you wanted to know about that. All right, we're continuing on here. I have abused my privilege because sometimes when you have the phone number of a legislator, you just call them up because you're like, I got to know what your thoughts are on this. And Ben was already in the chat room commenting on this. Representative Ben Carpenter down on the peninsula joins us this morning for his thoughts on this kind of micro revelation that Brad brought up to me. I'm definitely feeling it. So Ben, what are your thoughts? I mean, we all understood the $100 billion thing, but Brad just put a new spin on it. Do you think he's far off? What do you say here?
No, Michael, I don't think he's far off at all. The whole concept of getting rid of the earnings reserve account is to make it easier to manage the entire fund. And you kind of have to back up and ask yourself, why do we have an earnings reserve account in the first place? And it was created in order for the earnings of the fund, right, the income of the fund to have a place to go, and that's what its purpose is. Originally, you had a permanent fund dividend check that was paid from the earnings. So if you didn't have any earnings, or your earnings were reduced over a number of years, then your permanent fund dividend check was smaller. And that's the way that the structure of the statutory formula was written. So now that we've got this 5% of market value draw, we're drawing from the earnings reserve account in order to pay that 5% market value draw. And if you don't have enough earnings, then where do you get your money? If the earnings reserve account keeps dwindling because of your investment allocation doesn't put enough income into that earnings reserve account, then you don't have enough money to draw for the 5% draw. So in that regard, it's a disconnect between the fund allocation decision, the demand or necessity for that income to be realized on an annual basis for the earnings draw. But if you get away and you do away with the earnings reserve account, roll it into the corpus, then you can just draw from a portion of the corpus that is more liquid than others.
Right.
And that is exactly what they're saying is necessary. So, you'll hear from the permanent fund corporation says, yeah, well, maybe we draw from the corpus this year and next year, but we'll make it back in future years. That's their mindset, and they point to other major funds like investment funds, or I'm sorry, like Harvard's fund, big endowments. And they'll say that, well, this is how it's set up for them. So over the long term, if you take a long term, 10, 20, 30, 50 year outlook on this, well, the fund is always going to grow over the long term.
Right.
And it'll make back what you draw out of the fund. But I don't think it's an accurate thing to state to think that we're going to end up with a government funded from permanent fund earnings and no taxes. I don't agree that that's the outcome we'll get. We're going to get a government that's funded by permanent fund earnings, and we're going to get taxes. Because at some point in time, the people who are participating in a government that doesn't need the private economy are people who would like to see government grow. And when you want government to grow, but you don't have any more revenue coming from the permanent fund earnings to satisfy your growth need, you're going to go to taxes. So it's a lie to think that you're going to be able to live in a world where your state government can just be funded from the permanent fund earnings and you can avoid taxes, because it's just a truth in life. There's no free lunch. You're gonna have to pay for it one way or the other, and we're setting ourselves up for a future where government is going to be the thing in Alaska. You'll just know government's a big government, or Alaska's a big government state that takes care of its people.
Well, and I wonder again, this mention of what Brad was saying, that that it will be somewhat planned and intentional. It won't just be a byproduct of, oh, oops, we accidentally drew more from the fund than what the earnings were, but that it'll be as intended, and that they can just then spend. I mean, I ascribe a little bit better motives to people than that. But I mean, if they are cynical enough to say, I'm only going to be here 20 years, so we can draw 20 years from the corpus, and we still won't be hurt, and we still won't have taxes, then I can leave, or pull all my toys up and skedaddle. That's cynical. But if that's the case, then we're going to be left with an even bigger mess and potential mess than we have right now.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm willing to go that far to say that people are that incredibly selfish. Yes, I know those people exist. I'm not naive. I think the bigger play here is the thing that is in people's mind is that there's an equation that says no taxes is the best outcome. And therefore, what we have available to us, we only have three sources, largely three sources of revenue: your income from your federal government, your oil taxes, which is our private economy tie to our state government budget, and your permanent fund earnings. And so we're just looking at what's available to us and saying, well, I would rather have more permanent fund earnings paying for state government than increasing oil taxes. I would rather have more permanent fund earnings paying for state government than adding a new tax. And that's the simple equation, because that's what's sitting. It's a vision problem, right? All I've got is the reality that's in front of me, and my choice is: do I increase taxes over here or use permanent fund earnings? And so I'll just default to permanent fund earnings without really thinking about the long-term implications of having a state government that is fully reliant upon a fund that continues to grow into the future. What happens with your government then? It just continues to grow, and there's no connection to what you and your local economy are doing. And that's a recipe for disaster for that local economy. You have to want your government to care about your local economy.
Right. What do you say to people who, when we bring up and start talking about things, I mean, Fat Ray said it earlier, what about places like California and New York, all these high tax states that it didn't affect them? The people may have complained, but it didn't affect them. And even when they have a huge outflow of people and an exodus, they're still not bringing their taxes down. People arguing that it doesn't matter. So what's your rebuttal to them when they say, well, other places have taxes and the people's word doesn't matter at that point? What do you say?
Well, if we're talking about California and the exodus because a high tax state, the history's not done being written yet. I don't agree that things aren't going to have to change in California if their outward migration of people continues. That's it doesn't make sense to me.
No, I mean
I think that things are going to have to change in California if they keep running people out
right.
of California.
Well, and that's what I said earlier, is that it's inevitable that that's going to have to come down because there won't be enough people left to support what they're trying to do. And that
the economic engine is what is necessary, and you have to have people for that economic engine.
So as you look at this, Ben, what is and all the things that we just talked about, the corpus, the $100 billion, the draw, the, potential for taxation, the elimination of the PFD, all these things. I mean, what's your vision of a solution? What do you think needs to happen to bring us back on track so that we're not facing an even deeper crisis than what we have right now? What's the answer here?
So there's a balance that's required, and incentives matter. So the appropriate thing for the legislature to do is to look at what is our goal. What do we really want? We want a growing economy. We want jobs. We want prosperity. And how do you incentivize that? Well, you incentivize that by having your government care about whether you have a growing economy or not. For what we're constitutionally required to do in Juneau every year is pass a budget. That means you have to have your budget care whether you've got a private sector economy. I would point to what happened here in this last legislature with our support of the Willow Project. You had unanimous support, even amongst the left, that we want to see the Willow Project go. Well, it's now part of the Alaska Democrat Party platform to get rid of the oil industry. So why would they support the Willow Project? Well, it's because the Willow Project means more oil through taps, and it means more money into state coffers. So you're incentivized. You know that you want the Willow Project because you've got more cash to spend on your programs, whatever you want state government to be spent on. So you're incentivizing the activity that you want, and we just aren't incentivizing the non-oil economy in this state. And I would just point out that if you've got a declining economy and a high tax environment, that's a negative experience. We don't want that. What we want is a high performing economy, a growing economy, and a low tax environment. We have right now, which is a low tax environment and a low growth economy.
Right. Because they're divorced from the private economy.
That's exactly it. There's a complete disconnect between what the legislature is prioritizing, which is good policies for energy production, good policies for housing, good policies, just good policies in general for the private economy where everybody lives, because it doesn't matter to what we talk about in Juneau every year, which is what do we do with our money and towards state government and maintaining state government. That's the impetus between for the conversations that are in the budget is how are we going to take care of services? We don't ever say how are we going to take care of the private economy.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that state government spending is going to be the thing that grows the economy. That's not what I'm saying. But let's have a conversation about regulation. Our regulations that the legislature has put in place, the mechanisms by which we regulate our energy, have given us a situation in South Central Alaska where there aren't enough producers of natural gas to continually produce natural gas for ourselves.
Right.
We thought that the regulations to keeping gas, the structure to regulate what we can be charged for gas was a good thing, but the incentive was not there for people to go out and find more gas. So now, a decade later, we're going to run out of gas because we thought keeping the prices low or disconnected from the market was a good thing. When in reality, we really wanted more production of gas and a continual, reliable stream of natural gas, which means your regulation scheme didn't work.
60 seconds here, Ben. Final thoughts on this. I mean, what direction do we as a people need to take as listeners, as voters? What do we need to be doing?
Well, it's an election year, and elections have consequences.
Yeah.
So what listeners need to know is the people that you send down to Juneau are going to make decisions, and you need to send somebody down there that cares about the private economy. That's where you work, and where you live, and where you expect your kids to live and work one day, or you at least hope to. If we want to stop the outward migration of people, then we need to have a robust and growing private economy where there's hope and there's jobs and an economy that will support our livelihood. And so you have to send people down there that think about that. Don't send people down there that think about how to say yes to unions and government growth, right? And I say private, public sector unions, because the more government we grow, the harder it is for the local economy or for the economy to compete.
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate you allowing me to give you a call on this, because your comments in the chat room were spot on kind of with what I was thinking. So appreciate your thoughts. Thank you for calling in. Hold the line for just a second. Folks, we're out of time. We got more coming up. Chris Story's up next.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
All right, Ben. Well, thank you so much, my friend. I mean, I just looking at it from this perspective, and maybe it's the more cynical perspective that Brad has brought up, but it really worries me now that I think about it, because there are people in there who have that short-sighted vision of, as long as we can build up what we need to build up, as long as I'm here and then I can leave. That's the thing that worries me for sure.
We've got this really socialist document of a constitution, and the whole concept of collective ownership of our natural resources is a unique in our union. And what we're about to get to is when you get rid of the permanent fund dividend, and it is no longer an individual benefit. The permanent fund earnings are no longer an individual benefit. Then what you end up having is a handful of people deciding what's best for everybody else with regard to that ownership. So your ownership state will be expressed by a handful of legislators through government, rather than your ownership state being expressed through individual benefit from your ownership. And that is, I don't think that's in the best interest of Alaskans. I think it would be better that we have, Alaskans have been very individualistic. We want limited government. We want government to stay out of our way, but that means you have to keep an eye on government because it's going to grow if it can.
Yeah,
and that's just its nature. This isn't something that Ben's coming up with. This is things that way smarter people have written about throughout history. Government's going to grow to consume all the resources and all the things that it can, and so we have to stay on top of that. That's why elections matter.
That's the Parkinson's principle of government. It will expand to consume all available monies. That's kind of how it works. All right, Ben. Well, thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you coming on board.
Have a good day, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. All right. We're going to get Chris on the line here. I see Alexi Moore is in the chat room. She said very informational, very good information there. Alexi, I sent you an email about appearing on the show. And if you have time tomorrow on the program, I actually have an opening that popped up. So if you want to appear on the show tomorrow at 7:05, you can let me know. I would love to, if that's the case, then check your email and send me another email. Let me get Story on the line here before we go any further here. But I thought it'd be good to fill up that slot right now if I could. And see, I saw Alexi in the chat room. I thought that would be good as well. Let's go over here and see if we can get Mr. Story.
Good morning, Michael. How are you doing?
Hello, my friend. Hello. How are you today? What's on your mind? What's the hot news from you today?
I get my hot news from you. So
okay,
what's that supposed to mean?
Okay, all right. What's happening? What's on your mind today? What are we gonna talk about here?
A wealth everlasting.
A wealth everlasting. Okay. I mean, is this riches in the kingdom put up before blah 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 blah, or what? Give me a further tease. Huh?
Easy for you to say.
Yes.
I did enjoy your conversation with Ben just now. I thought that was good. It's a nice segue into what you and I are going to talk about.
Okay. So we're going to talk about, again,
your economy, not the economy, but your economy.
Your economy. My future wealth. My wealth put up into whatever. Okay. How's everything going? How's life in the big city down there?
It's great. It's great. A little overcast today, but that's great. You know, we need some rain. We need a little, get things a little greener. It's all good. It's been so busy down here. I went out to the Spit Sunday, and I've never seen it that busy. It was just amazing. Crawling with people like ants. But if you don't go out there, you don't realize it. And then you go out there and you go, man, we're in the heat of the middle of our busiest tourist season.
Yeah, no, I've seen a few of I've gone out there a few times on the Spit during, some of these busier weekends, 4th of July, et cetera. And it's like, man, it's like bumper to bumper, slow roll traffic all the way out there. And it's just people everywhere, which is great. I mean, I love to see it because more people enjoy it.
And my favorite is when they just start crossing the road, just with impunity. Like, it doesn't matter. They're just crossing, gazing up and around. It's like, it's thank God nobody's been hit, but people are pretty mindful, I think, of the pedestrian now that rules.
Oh, I don't know.
That section.
A couple of years ago, I was driving down there and I was rolling down past Captain Patty's, and some guy had 4 kids behind him, and his wife was looking behind him, and he was on his phone, and they just walked out. They didn't even look. They just walked out in the street, and the kids, of course, are just following dad. And I'm just like, boop. I'm like, whoa, okay, wait a second, dude. I mean,
when you say bloop, does that mean you hit them?
No.
What was bloop mean?
No, I hit the brakes because I was like, they just stepped out in front of me. Like, I'm rolling, I'm not going fast, but they just stepped right out. They wasn't even looking.
Your sound effect kind of made it seem like you killed them all.
No, it was the thought. I don't give in to dark thoughts anymore, Chris. All right, here we go. Jumping back into it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Chris Story, our guest. Little pick-me-up. Let's get to it. Here we go. All right, we're continuing now. Christopher Story is our guest. We talk about positivity and pottery and how not to be a nihilist and everything else. I'm still working on that last one here. But Chris Story joins us this morning to talk about our future wealthy economy. That was not what he said, but I've just butchered it. What are we talking about today?
Not even close. You took a beautiful filet mignon
I know.
and turned it into chuck steak.
I just drop it into a grinder and filet mignon. It becomes ground beef. It doesn't matter. It's all delicious.
Mm-hmm.
So what
filet mignon?
Yeah, what was the filet mignon that I just mangled?
Wealth everlasting. It just rolls off the tongue.
I'm sorry. I should just be wealth everlasting. Because I can't
get magnanimous.
It's like a squirrel. I can't. You said it, and then I immediately forgot it. So wealth everlasting. So give us the rundown here. What are we talking about?
Well, there's a simple concept that runs through my mind pretty frequently, especially in dark days, and especially when things are happening completely outside of our control on a national, global level, even statewide, or even local level. You cannot control the economy. You individually have zero control over the economy, but you have 100% control over your economy. Thus, the 4-home formula is equivalent to wealth everlasting for you. So my goal and my mission is to help as many people as possible own more of their own community and ensure that you have more control over your economy, but also you'll have influence in and around and over your community and the direction your community goes. Because ultimately, we become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Jim Rohn said, and I believed him, and I think it's true, and you see it in your own life. And so if you just think about your locus of control in your community and your economy, what are you doing about it? And are you building prosperity? Are you building wealth? Are you building something for the future, passive income for yourself, and a fortune you can leave behind and leave a legacy for those after you're gone? It all comes back to, what do you have control over? You can't control the economy, but you're responsible 100% for your economy.
What I find interesting about your approach to all this is, Ken, of course, talking about, the backyard millionaire, helping people, find wealth in their own backyard, helping them get their first 4 homes, or in some areas, 3 homes will make you a millionaire. That no matter what's going on in the economy overall, people still got to live somewhere, right? People still got to have housing. So it's the one thing that, as far as I think investment goes, it, like you said, it almost doesn't matter what the regular economy is doing, as long as you're prepared and thinking about it. There can be some benefit for you and everybody else around you.
And statisticians all across the country are telling us we have a housing shortage, and that's not going to be fixed overnight. At some point, then there'll be a burgeoning surplus, and then it shrinks, and it always expands and contracts. It's just the nature of the economy. The question is, what portion of it is yours, and what are you doing about your own prosperity? Buckminster Fuller described prosperity as the amount of money or wealth you have going forward without working for it. So it's cash flow that comes to you into the future without having to go out and physically trade your time for a paycheck. And so if you're watching other people build this around you and think, I'd like a taste of that, I'd like to start there. It's not, I don't want to say it's easy, but getting started is easy. But also, we know that which is easy to do is easy not to do. And therefore, it's easy not to get started. But it is as simple as making a decision to cut off from any other route of opportunity or excuses and say, I am deciding to do this, and I'm going to begin. And where do you begin? Right where you are and with what you've got. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, well, I don't have a lot of money saved up. And within a few minutes, within 15 minutes, we had outlined a potential opportunity for an investment without a lot of money, without almost any of their own money. And it's just about surrounding yourself with the right people and relationships. And relationships are at the absolute heart of your economy. And if you've got good relationships and rapport building skills, great. If not, it's okay too. There are books, there's courses, there's mentors, there's people that can help you begin to learn how to and build and develop relationships.
I mean, this is a matter of it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? I mean, that's an old adage,
Sometimes.
but it truly is leveraging those friendships and those relationships to be able to put you in contact with, because you don't have to know everybody. You just have to know other people who know a few people, and all of a sudden your sphere of influence grows. And you talked about it in your book, The Backyard Millionaire, where, kind of the Oscar character there, he plugs the main character into some people who help him start with almost nothing and build up from there. And it can be done, but you've got to know people. You've got to have that sphere of influence. And I know last week you made an offer to people that if they wanted a consult on getting started, that all they had to do was reach out to you. I'm curious, did anybody reach out to you, Chris? Did anybody make that decision, that simple decision to just get started?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had an amazing conversation with the one person who took me up on it. We had an incredible conversation, and we're going to be following up with each other. And he is now I consider him part of my sphere of influence, and it was amazing. Yeah, I really appreciated that very much. Great guy up in Fairbanks. Really, really good conversation, and it gave me pause to stop and think, like, because I was talking to him, and it's like, this person's already successful, and I thought that was interesting. This person's already successful, headed towards a very good future, lots of options, and yet still wanted, I don't want to say leverage, but wanted a little something extra. I mean, isn't that interesting? What an interesting trait about people. And if we're going to look at success, then why not do as success does, which is reach out, which is to say, I'm interested in knowing what you think about this versus just going on social or whatever and spewing what you think. Are you curious about what other people think? And in so doing, you learn and you begin to adapt and adopt different ideas. And that sphere of influence, those 5 people you spend the most time with, or at least align with. And what are you listening to? What are you watching? I spend most of my run yesterday on the treadmill. I watched the red meat thrown to the lions. I mean, the Cheeto, investigation
Hearings,
over
right?
the
The
Secret
hearings,
Service
right?
debacle.
Yeah.
And I just thought that is fascinating. This is interesting. And once I was done, an hour later, I was like, okay, done. Put that on a shelf. I've got what I need to know about that. I don't have to watch the wall-to-wall news about it. I've got a good sense, unfiltered sense of what's happening, not waiting for a talking head to tell me what to think about it. Go to the source, get that information, bookmark it, and move on and focus on your economy or your local news. What is happening right in your own backyard? I can tell you right now, there are things afoot in my community that I need to be involved in. I need to know about. It's impacting my real estate. Again, it comes back to my economy versus the economy. But what's happening in the halls of power is going to affect you. So you've got to be aware. You have to be paying attention, plug in, don't bury your head in the sand, but also don't get so distracted with the 24-hour news cycle we've got and the economists telling us what's happening. And you remember Janet Yellen. I'm not an economist, Michael.
Right.
I barely got out of high school. And I can tell you, when she sat down before Congress and said that the inflation we were experiencing was going to be transitory, I instantly knew she was lying. And she's smarter than that, and she was lying to us. We of course knew it wasn't transitory. We knew it was coming, and the tide was coming in, and we could see that our vehicles were all stuck out in the sand, and the tide was coming in. So we've got to be paying attention to this, but not to a point where it becomes a sport, a blood sport, or a game that distracts us from our own personal economy, because that's what you have 100% control over.
All right, Chris, finish up one final minute here. What do folks do? Are you still offering that one-on-one session? What are we doing?
Yeah, just a reminder, you cannot save your way to wealth, but you can invest your way to a fortune if you can learn to save. So it's part and parcel. If you need, I would throw that back out there, Michael. If somebody needed something, just text next steps to me at 299-7653, and I'll be there for you.
All right, 299-7653, text next steps. And Chris will get with you. Only one person took him up on it. I had a couple of people comment in the chat room. I thought you'd have more, but it is definitely it's worth what you paid for it, which was nothing. It's worth a lot more than that because Chris has advised me on some stuff, and I got to tell you, nothing like having somebody in your corner who believes in what you're doing. And I think it's pretty exciting stuff. Chris Story, thank you, my friend. As always, it's great to talk with you. Thanks for coming in today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, that brings us up to the end of the show today. Tomorrow, Miguel Ramirez will be joining us, and maybe Alexi Moore. We'll see what happens there. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. All right, I got to go. Thank you for coming on board, folks. Appreciate you being part of it today. As always, Brian says, surrounding yourself with the right people, that's why I'm in the 6 o'clock club. Yep, it's true. We are the right people for something. We're the right people for something. We're always trying to make it right. All right, well, we're out of time, folks. Got to go. We will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.